हेलो फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लासेस में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको जॉन कीट्स के और अन्य जो लॉन्ग आंसर है उनके बारे में बताएंगे। क्वेश्चन है, राइट ए नोट ऑन कीट्स मेडिवलिज्म। आंसर है, मेडिवलिज्म डिनोट्स द रिवाइवल ऑफ इंटरेस्ट इन द मिडल एजेज। दिस इंटरेस्ट इन द मिडल एजेज वाज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट इम्पॉर्टेंट characteristics of the Romantic movement. The Romantic poets found the life of the Middle Ages as highly inspiring to their poetic temperament. In fact, the Romantics were dissatisfied with their present, so they sought an ideal world of their dream in the Middle Ages. According to Pater, the romantic quality in literature is addition of strangeness of beauty, and this strangeness the romantic poets Coleridge, Scott and Keats found in the medieval life and legends. Keats had a special fascination for the medieval life. He found a special charm in the color and pageantry, magic and witchcraft, tales of love, adventure and chivalry of the Middle Ages. In a number of poems, Keats' love of medieval life is seen. In The Eve of St. Agnes, The Eve of St. Mark, La Vallée Damson's Mercy, and a few other poems, he has recreated the medieval life with all its pomp and pageantry. Heading a characteristics of Keats' medievalism. Keats' medievalism has its special features. Keats was not concerned with the religious side of the Middle Ages. He did not bother himself about the unquestioned supremacy of Christianity. He mainly dwelt upon the medieval superstitions. He was charmed by the supernatural and superstitious myths and legends of the Middle Ages. He tried to explore the mystery beneath the appearance of visual reality. Another notable aspect of Keats' medievalism is the cult of heroism. Keats was himself a lean and frail creature, but he derived a vicarious joy from the tales of heroism and love. But like Sir Walter Scott, he did not like to highlight the thrill and visual adventures of the heroes of old. On the other hand, he dwelt upon passion and the romantic background of that passion rather than upon action and thrilling adventures. This is evidenced in The Eve of St. Agnes, in which the note of passion rather than adventure on the part of Porphyro is emphasized. Porphyro does not come like a traditional hero to have Madeline, but enters stealthily into the castle with his passionately burning heart. The same impression is created in the ballad La Vallée Damson's Mercy. Next heading is The Eve of St. Agnes. The Eve of St. Agnes has its setting in the medieval world. Its story is based on the medieval superstitions that a maiden, by observing certain ritual on the eve of St. Agnes, could win sight of her would-be husband in a dream. They told her how upon St. Agnes' Eve young virgins might have visions of delight if ceremonies due they did arise. Keats recreates the medieval atmosphere through the story of the two lovers belonging to the varying families. Porphyro, the lover, gains access to the castle of his beloved Madeline at the risk of his life. 100 swords of his enemies would have pierced his body had his presence in the castle become known, but like the medieval hero he elopes with the lady of his dreams. Keats has reduced Porphyro to a love-laden hero. He is torn by the passion of love. Keats has successfully recreated the medieval atmosphere in the narrative. Here the poet throws his imagination back to the medieval past and gives a medieval setting to a love story which is full of daring and adventures. There are all the medieval accessories: the adventurous knight, the beautiful love-lorn lady believing in the medieval legends of St. Agnes, the batsman saying prayers for sinners, the medieval castle, and the argent chivalry. The medieval world is before the eyes of the readers. There is the batsman telling his rosary and saying his prayer. There is the reference to the medieval story of Merlin's death by treachery. There is the wonderful picture of a thousands heraldries, dim emblazonings, and a shielded escutcheons blessing with the blood of queens of king and kings. There is finally the baron who dreamed that night of witch and demon and many a woe. All these lends the medieval touch to the narrative. The medieval pomp and pageantry is also seen in the poem. For example, the feudal mansion has been described with medieval pomp, color, and pageantry. A casement high and triple arched, there was all garlands with carven imageries of fruits and flowers and birches of knots grass and diamonded with pens of quaint device, innumerable of stains and splendid dice. Next studying La Belle Damson's Mercy. The La Belle Damson's Mercy is also medieval in theme and treatment. It deals with a knight at arms who falls in love with a beautiful lady fairy without mercy. The ballad illustrates the medieval spirit of knight errantry and chivalry. In the Middle Ages, the knights used to wander about in search of fresh adventures. They would go out to fight evil and to help the poor and the oppressed, particularly fair ladies in distress. In the La Valley, the knight at arms is seen haggard and woe-begone. He is alone and palely loitering. He meets a lady full beautiful, but the lady is not an earthly woman. She is a witch and enchantress in the shape of the beautiful woman to ensure unsuspecting men who fall in love with her. Keats highlights the supernatural elements by mentioning the horrible dream. I saw pale kings and warriors, two pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La Belle Damson's mercy hath thee in thrall. Thus this poem is full of the atmosphere of magic and witchcraft. In it, the medieval revival reached its culmination. In the eve of St. Mark, there is medieval element. This poem, though a fragment, deals with the medieval superstitions that a person stand near a church porch at twilight on the eve of St. Mark would see the apparitions of those about to die or be brought near death in the ensuing year. In the Ode to a Nightingale, there is recreated the world of medieval romance in the following lines. The same that oft times hath charmed magic casements opening on the form of perilous seas and fairy lands forlorn. Likewise, Keats pays tribute to the Middle Ages in several other poems. Keats' medievalism is not complete without a reference to his use of old meters. Keats discarded the conventional heroic couplet and resorted to various old meters, which had begun to gain popularity with the publication of Macpherson's Ossians and Parsi's Reliques. Keats used the Ballad meter in La Valide Sans Mercy. In the eve of St. Agnes, he used the Spenserian stanza, the stanza form used for a fairy tale. Thus, Keats revived medievalism both in matter and manner. Next question है, write a note on Keats' pictorial quality or Keats as a word painter. Answer: Keats is a word painter par excellence. If he had not been a poet, he would certainly have been a painter. Pictorial quality is the most remarkable feature of his poetry. The reader has a rich feast of picture. Picture follows picture in quick succession, and each picture is remarkable for its vividness and minuteness of detail. In this respect, Keats is a direct descendant of Spenser. Many of his images suggest a definite picture, as in Spenser, to our mental eye. Courthope rightly remarks about this quality of Keats' poetry. Poetry and plastic art merge and mingle in the works of Keats. Heading है suggestiveness. The very special feature of Keats' word pictures is that a single epithet or a few only suggest that whole picture. He is master painter, though not with the brush of short vivid pictures in which, with a few words, he contrives to finish a picture of the vast size. A single epithet suggests a whole picture. For instance, full-throated ease gives us the picture of the nightingale singing apparently with efforts, with its throat distended, but really with complete absence of strain, which must ever accompany all perfect art. In the same ode, purple stand mouth, it is a vacuous expression suggesting the growing exhilaration of the drinker, and the previous line, beaded bubbles winking at the brims, gives a picture complete in all its details. The same effect was also produced by lines such as these: here where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy, sex a few and last grey hairs. The vividness of the picture of an old man, palsy-stricken, his hairs grey and few, standing and trembling as if it were on the verge of the tomb, can hardly be surpassed. In the Ode to Autumn, Keats' full-size word pictures of the different activities of the season. Sometimes whoever seeks abroad may find thee sitting ceaseless on a granary floor, thy hair soft lifted by the blowing wind, or on a half-ribbed furrow, sound asleep, drowed with the fume of poppies, while thy hook spears the next south and all its twinned flowers, and sometimes like a gleaner thou dost keep steady thy laden head across brook, or by a cider press with patient look thou watchest the last aging hours by hours. In the Ode to a Nightingale, there is yet another highly suggestive picture, full of the true and blissful hippocrene, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple stained mouth. These lines suggest much more than they actually describe. The use of blissful winking purple stained mouth conjures up the images of a glistening maiden beckoning to her lover, having a colorful pictures. Keats had a keen eye for color. Like a painter, her luxuriates in an orgy of colors. Dawson rightly remarks the pictures of Keats are all aglow with color, not always very accurate painter's color, but color which captivate or overwhelms the senses. In his autumn ode, the vine leaves are green, the moss is emerald, the apples are golden yellow, and the thatched roof is grey. Note the profusion of colors in the following passage from Lamia, part first, where the serpent is described before she is transformed into a beautiful maiden by Hermes. She was a Gordian shape of dazzling hue, vermilion, spotted, golden, green, and blue, striped like a zebra, fragged like a pard, eyed like a peacock, and all crimson varied, and full of silver moons that, as she breathed, dissolved brighter, shone, or interwedged their lustrous with gloomier tapestries. Such profusion of detail and orgy of colors earned for him the title of the father of the pre-Raphaelite brotherhood of a succeeding age. The casement of Madeline's chamber in the eve of St. Agnes will defy a painter's skill, so full and varied are the details. A casement high and triple arched, there was all garlanded with carven in imageries of fruits and flowers, and bunches of knot grass, and diamonded with panes of quaint device, innumerable of stones and splendid dyes, as are the tiger moth's deep demasked wings, and in the midst, among thousands heraldries and twilight scents and dim bludgeoning a shielded Killerchain blushed with blood of queens and kings. Full of this casement shone the wintry moon, and threw warm glow on Madeline's fair breast as down she knelt for heaven's grace and boon. Heading a life-like picture. A particular feature of Keats' pictorial craftsmanship is that he infuses life and feelings into his pictures to make his pictures more vivid and lifelike. He imparts them with life and power to feel. His dead objects are presented in terms of life, movement and feeling. In the Eve of St. Agnes, Keats draws the portraits of the statues of kings and queens. These are presented as feelings, the sensation of utter cold. The sculptured dead on each side seems to freeze. He passed by, and his weak spirit fails to think how they may act in icy hoods and nails. Likewise, the angles carved in stones are presented at staring. The carved angles eager's eyes see starred, where upon their heads the cornice rest. Next, heading is sensuous pictures. Most of Keats' pictures are sensuous in appeal. In other words, they appeal to our sense of sight, sense of taste, senses of smell, senses of hearing, and senses of touch. The following picture of the delicacies on Porphyro's table in the Eve of St. Agnes appeals to our senses or of taste, sight and smell simultaneously, while he from forth the closest brought a heap of candied apple, quince and plum, and gourd with jellies smoother than the creamy curd, and lucent syrups intact with cinnamon manna, the dates in argosy transferred from Fiji and specialized dainties, every one from silken Somersets to Cadard Lebanon. The picture of the charmer lady in La Redemption's Mercy is equally sensuous. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. About this aspect of Keats' word painting and imagery, C.L. Fanny has observed his poetry is not only rich in line, color, light, and shade and sound, but it is also rich in images of the intimately physical sensation of taste, touch, smell, temperature, and pressure, and in images of the organic sensations such as hunger and thirst. Thus his imagery is both sensuous and comprehensive. In Keats' picture, the concreteness of his images leaves a concrete impression on our mind. Thus Keats' poetry possesses supreme pictorial quality. He is a painter in poetry, and in many ways the precursor of the pre-Raphaelite movement. Even Tennyson is indebted for his pictorial art of Keats. Next question, write a note on Keats' love of beauty or Keats as on aesthete or Keats as a poet of beauty or beauty is truth beauty? Answer heading है beauty and religion. Keats not only loved beauty but he worshipped it as a devotee. Love of beauty is the dominant note of his poetry from the early Endymion to his last poem Hyperion. If I should die, Keats wrote, I have left no immortal work behind me, nothing to make my friends proud of my memory, but I have loved the principle of beauty in all things, and if I had time, I would have made myself remembered. Keats is remembered as a poet of beauty. For him, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. With a great poet, says Keats, the sense of beauty overcomes every other consideration. In a letter to Wodehouse, Keats wrote, I feel assured I should write from the mere yearning and fondness I have for the beautiful, even if my night's labors should be burnt every morning and no eye ever shine upon them. Beauty was for Keats and moving spirit of his life and art. Beauty was his religion. To him, beauty was an exaltation of the senses made creative by that exaltation. Heading his conception of beauty. There are different and opposite interpretations regarding Keats' concept of beauty. For Mr. Ford, Keats' chief poems celebrate sexual love and sensuous beauty. On the other hand, Wasserman, Mary, and Bradley have found the presence of ideal beauty in Keats' poems. The fact is that Keats' conception of beauty underwent a gradual change in his earliest poetic phases. He loved the sensuous beauty. In his maturer poetic phases, he loved the ideal beauty. In the beginning, his love of beauty was entirely sensuous. He was possessed with an extraordinary organic sensibility and so could perceive objects of sense more intensely than ordinary people. Even common everyday objects which leave others unmoved and unaffected thrilled him and filled him with aesthetic pleasure. Beauty of mythology and folklore, in short, loveliness of everything from earth to heaven, threw him into wild rapture. His friend Haydn bears testimony to his love of beauty when he states, the humming of bee is the sight of a flower, the glitter of the sun seemed to make his nature tremble, then his eyes flashed, his cheeks glowed, and his Malta quivered, and the son of a nightingale could transport him to fairyland or to thick forest where, enveloped with darkness, he would enjoy the sweet fragrance of many a flower. Even the season of autumn, considered disagreeable by others, has its own charms and pleasures for him. To him it is a season of golden mist and mellow fruitfulness, a season which was its own sweet music, equally keen and intense in his delight in female charms. light-filled dark violet eyes and parted hair, soft dimpled hands, rich neck and dreamy breast. So Keats is a poet of light feet and dark violet eyes, etc. He loves sensuous beauty of all kinds. His passage from the sensuous to the spiritual beauty is a very smooth and evolutionary. He had a yearning for beauty that was truth, and he wrote, I feel assured I should write from the mere yearning and fondness for the beautiful, even if my night's labors should be burned every morning. Gradually his aestheticsia came to have an intellectual cantor. He declared that a thing of beauty is a joy forever, and that beauty is truth, and truth beauty. He craved for eternal beauty instead of temporal sensuous beauty. Physical beauty faded with time and finally dies out completely. It is only spiritual beauty, or the beauty of ideas, that lives eternally. He bids farewell to sensuous beauty and sensuous joy. And can I ever bid these joyful farewell? Yes, I must pass them for a nobler life, where I may find the agonies, the strife of human hearts. Keats realizes that beauty is a power in the Hyperion, a virgin he commends, for it's the eternal law that first in beauty should be first in might. So he identified beauty first with truth and then with power. Rightly says Matthew Arnold, the truth is that the yearning passion for the beautiful, which was with Keats, as he himself truly says, the master passion is not a passion of sensuous and sentimental poet. It is an intellectual and spiritual passion. Last adding a conclusion. Hence, among all poets of Romantic revival, Keats was the only truly aesthete beauty, because he believed that the truth of imagination was the ultimate truth, almost divine and eternal, and truth and beauty were synonymous. What imagination seizes as beauty must be truth, wrote Keats in one of his letters. Whether it existed before or not, to him the life of reason and logic was painful and ugly. A. R. Weeks has summed up the whole matter in the following lines. First, it may be said that the differentia of Keats, his roots quality, is the disinterested love of beauty. He, more than any of his fellows, grasped the essential oneness of beauty and truth. His cry is, seek ye first the ideal beauty, and all other things shall be added unto you. Because he had no time to sing out all that was in him, he has been rather more misunderstood than most other men of genius, and his creed has been taken to mean beauty of form alone. But Keats, like Shakespeare, thought much about questions of conduct. His ideal was the Greek ideal of beauty, inward and outward, the perfect soul of verse as well as the perfect form, and precisely because he held this ideal, he was free from the wish to preach which beset Wordsworth and Shelley. Thanks, best of luck.